Hello, I'm Justin Levitt, and I'm here for the Political History of Tanzania, Political Historiography of Tanzania presentation for my History 460 class. Introduction. Historians watched Tanzania's journey closely as the post-colonial nation moved from its establishment in 1964 to its current position of stability within East Africa. This political historiography will examine the various ways historians interpret that journey, focusing on the Nyerere regime and Ujamaa socialism. This presentation is immensely indebted to the work of Paul K. Bjerg at Texas Tech University entitled Sovereignty and Socialism in Tanzania, the Historiography of an African State. The late 1960s. This is the period I'm calling, for lack of a better term, is Ujamaa really socialist? During this time, right after the establishment of Tanzania, Issa Shivji argued that Ujamaa was not true socialism. And this view was expanded upon by Kwame Nkrumah, Michael Lofty, and others. The majority consensus was that Ujamaa was socialist in name, but in reality it was a power grab by the Nyerere government. The early 1970s were different, however. This is what I'm calling the "it's not that simple, culture matters" period. The reason is because during this time, Joel Samoff argued that the previous consensus about Ujamaa was too simplistic. G. Andrew Maguire and others contended that Ujamaa, which is village socialism, could not be understood without taking into account the culture and lives of Tanzanian villagers. It's not escaped my notice that this is the early 1970s and culture has made its way in. However, I am not certain whether or not this has to do with the cultural turn, but it is an interesting connection that I've noticed between the two. The late 1970s, I'm calling this the reasons why it didn't work. That's because Ujamaa socialism in the mid-1970s failed and fell apart. After Ujamaa socialism fell apart and was abandoned in the mid-1970s, John S. Saul and Dean McHenry led a conversation charging that the failure was due to socialism itself. They argued that socialism was intrinsically doomed to fail. However, this was not a consensus. Michael Lofty disagreed, arguing at the same time that disappointment with the Tanzanian state, fomented by socialist critics, had led to the failure. Keeping in mind this is during the Cold War, so there was a lot of anti-communism and criticism going around during that time, which Lofty believed was causal. The 80s and 90s, which I call "it was even worse than you thought" period. This is postmodern histories and criticisms. The postmodern historians, including Andrew Coulson, continued the critique of Nyerere, charging that Ujamaa was actually draconian policy and had been forced on the villagers. James Scott even draws parallels between the structure of Ujamaa and Michel Foucault's dreaded panopticon, which is the harshest criticism you could ever give. The panopticon is a famous prison where it is created with the express purpose of breaking the spirits of the prisoners by making them feel that they are constantly being watched. So any parallel between Ujamaa or anything and the panopticon is harsh criticism. But in the 2000s to the present, things chilled out a little bit. I'm calling this a wider, more nuanced perspective period. As Tanzania took on a stabilizing role within the larger Pan-African and East African context, Godfrey Mwakika-Gile and others revisited Nyerere's legacy with a bit of a more sympathetic eye. Without forgiving the mistakes of Ujamaa, historians like Eric Asika view Nyerere through a more holistic lens, one which credits his work in helping raise the nation out of the difficulties of imperialism. So again, more nuanced, not forgiving mistakes, but understanding the humanity and giving some credit where credit is due. So where does all this leave us? Well, among other possible insights, The historiography of Tanzania shows how historians are products of the times in which they live. Noticing how events in Tanzania and around the globe track so closely with the histories written reminds us that even the best historians have their individual perceptions, and those perceptions do come through. Thank you very much for watching my presentation. Have a good day.